Thank you, Troy. And a little bit of a disclosure, you're not going to get any limericks from me, and you're used to a pretty lively presentation from our executive director, Dan Wara, and you will not be getting that from me as well. I'm going over 36 recommendations in a short amount of time, so just trying to present the facts. So in March, as we have talked about, our governor signed the Southern Resident Killer Whale Recovery and Task Force Executive Order. Through this order, the governor established the Southern Resident Orca Task Force to identify, prioritize, and support the implementation of long-term actions for the recovery of Southern resident orcas. The task force had nearly 50 representatives from a diverse sector, including tribal, federal, local, and other state governments, state agencies, the Washington State Legislature, private sector, nonprofit organizations, and the Government of Canada. We have a problem sometimes herding 3 commissioners or 5. We reference it as herding cats. Imagine almost 50 people in a room with the world watching and many in the audience. It is anticipated that the governor will roll out his budget and policy priorities for the 2019 legislative session next week, so we don't know yet which recommendations will have immediate traction, be deferred, eliminated, or modified. What we do know is that we will all be affected, and we need to continue to stay at the table as this process moves forward. The vision. We envision a thriving and resilient population of southern resident orcas living in healthy waters and inspiring our descendants with their majesty. So the task force focused on 3 major threats. First, lack of prey. It is about the protein. The southern resident diet is comprised primarily of Chinook salmon, and in addressing lack of prey, habitat, forage fish, hydropower, predation, harvest, and hatcheries were all addressed. Second, disturbance from noise and vessel traffic. Vessels transiting near southern residents can produce underwater noise that masks or impairs orcas' communication and echolocation. This makes it harder for orcas to find food and reduces their time devoted to foraging by almost 20%. This reduces their potential prey intake and increases their energy expenditure. And third, toxic contaminants. In addition to these 3 key threats, climate change and ocean acidification are overarching issues that will continue to exacerbate the issues on southern residents. To help the task force complete its work, 3 working groups were established. The prey, vessels, and contaminants working groups were composed of relevant subject matter experts along with stakeholders. Each working group also had 20 to 35 members and 1 or 2 state agency leads. The working groups identified, researched, and analyzed potential actions and formulated recommendations for task force consideration. Port of Seattle Commissioner Fred Felleman worked on the vessel working group, and we also had Port of Ilwaco Commissioner Butch Smith serving on the task force, but he was wearing his Ilwaco Charters hat. Through the executive order, the governor also directed state agencies to implement 9 immediate actions, and there hasn't been a lot of attention on these 9 actions, so I did want to go over them. First, develop implementation plans for increased enforcement, outreach, and education of vessel and Chinook fisheries regulations. Review 2018 recreational and commercial fishing regulations. Explore options and develop a proposal to alter fish food used in state hatcheries to limit the amount of PCBs. Create a curriculum to improve and increase trainings for vessels in the whale watching industry to help in the event of an oil spill. Develop strategies for quieting state ferries. 6, prioritize outreach resources to support recovery and collaborate with the governor's office to develop a public education program. Identify the highest priority areas and watersheds for southern resident prey to focus or adjust restoration, protection, incentives, hatchery, harvest levels, and passage. 8, develop criteria to prioritize financial assistance for stormwater projects. And 9, demonstrate how Chinook recovery projects benefit southern resident recovery for the Pacific Coast Salmon Recovery Fund, the Puget Sound Acquisition and Restoration Fund, the Estuary and Salmon Restoration Program, and the Washington Coastal Restorative Initiative. The task force focused on developing a package of recommendations that would collectively have the impact needed to achieve its vision. The recommendations supported 4 goals. Goal 1, increase Chinook abundance. Goal 2, decrease disturbance from vessels and noise. Goal 3, reduce exposure to contaminants. And Goal 4, ensure funding and accountability. A total of 36 recommendations was put forth in the Year 1 report and were grouped under the 4 goals, including details for the governor, the legislature, agencies, and partners to consider during implementation. 10 recommendations would require legislation. This link will take you to the final report, and on pages 41 through 66, you can reference the details of each recommendation, and yes, I have every page and every action and recommendation memorized. And you too could join the fun for Year 2. There are 16 recommendations that support Goal 1, increase Chinook abundance. And like I said, it's about the protein, so it's not unusual to find that this is where most of the recommendations fall. 2 that support habitat restoration and acquisition. 2 that support protection of habitat through improved enforcement of existing laws, strengthening laws, and ensuring compliance. 1 that supports habitat protection through increasing incentive programs. And 1 that provides additional Chinook through increased hatchery production. Continuing under Goal 1 are 3 hydro recommendations. Recommendations 8 and 9 were addressed through a minority report that I submitted with the Washington Association of Business. In regards to spill, I suggested that this matter is more appropriate for analysis and recommendation by federal and state fish managers. In regards to Recommendation 9, establish a stakeholder process to discuss potential breaching or removal of the Lower Snake River dams for the benefit of southern residents. The minority report expressed concern that this was an unnecessary attempt to duplicate the much more extensive federal effort already underway and would divert resources away from actions that could produce real benefits in the short term. Also, under Goal 1 are 2 recommendations that address harvest through reduced catch and bycatch. And there are 3 predation recommendations under Goal 1. And the last 2 recommendations under Goal 1 address forage fish. Under Goal 2, decrease disturbance from vessels and noise, there are 12 total recommendations. 4 that reduce noise from small vessels, a statewide go slow bubble, a limited entry whale watching permit system for commercial whale watching and commercial kayak groups, an annual $10 endorsement for recreational boaters with an opt-out option, and increased enforcement capacity. Continuing with Goal 2 is a recommendation that discourages the use of echo sounders around orcas, and 2 that address noise from ships and ferries. Pausing here on Recommendation 22, consensus that the effort would be led by Puget Sound ports going forward into implementation phase. Northwest Seaport Alliance, along with the ports of Seattle and Tacoma, are already in conversation with the Port of Metro Vancouver on potential coordination with their ECHO program. If there are follow-up questions in regards to this recommendation, please see Jason Jordan, who's the Environmental Director at the Northwest Seaport Alliance. And if you're interested and don't know, ECHO stands for Enhancing Cetacean Habitat and Observation. Under Goal 2, there is a recommendation to reduce the threat of oil spills, and 4 recommendation that formalize or extend vessel protections, which is a bit of a catch-all, which ranges from coordinating with the Navy, increasing the buffer to 400 yards behind orcas, and a recommendation to determine how permit applications that increase traffic and vessel impacts could be required to explicitly address potential impacts to orcas and could treat underwater noise as a primary constituent element. Pay close attention to recommendations such as these and others under contaminants, as ports do need to engage with ecology, DNR, WDFW, the governor's office, and others as these move forward for determination by the agencies. Recommendation 28 is the one that has received most of the headline attention since the last task force meeting and report submission. This was put forward at the last meeting and suggests a regulation that precludes southern resident orca viewing by all boats, from recreational to kayak and whale watching industries for the next 3 to 5 years. I will actually defer to Amy Windrop when during her presentation that she will elaborate a little bit more on this particular recommendation. Contaminants is addressed under Goal 3, and there are 5 recommendations under this category. Recommendation 29 requests acceleration of implementation on the ban of PCBs, and Recommendation 30 requests ecology to develop a prioritized list of chemicals of emerging concern by March. Recommendation 31 has to do with stormwater, and we do much as far as ports in regards to stormwater cleanup efforts. We can also play an impactful role in public education as each of us individually causes harm in our small way as we commute to work, drive our kids to school, head to the grocery store, or strive for perfection in our lawns and gardens. The last 2 recommendations under Goal 3 address NPDES permits, which we will again need to pay particular attention to and request monitoring of toxic substances in marine waters. In my minority report, it was stated that elements of Recommendation 32 lacked adequate justification and is an example where cost-benefit data would have been especially useful. Additionally, I stated that I believe the contaminant recommendations should have been more forceful. Get the worst out of the water first. Large-scale toxic cleanup projects stand ready to proceed. At the Port of Everett, a $100 million cleanup improves nearshore habitat and prey species and migrating juvenile salmon. Funding generated by MACA should prioritize actions with clear environmental and economic benefits, and I was disappointed that recommendations did not advocate more forcefully for these actions. There are 3 recommendations under the last goal: to ensure sustainable funding, conduct research, science, and monitoring, and lastly, track progress and address gaps in year 2. A webinar in early January is planned to address budget and policy priorities. The next task force meeting will be held in mid to late March, and then most likely another in May, and then we'll continue to the end of the task force. Agencies are to report to the governor and the task force on progress implementing recommendations by May 1st, 2019. These reports are to address progress, shortcomings, issues, barriers, and gaps associated with the initial implementation. The task force will identify changes needed, any new ideas, and other actions, and produce a second report outlining the progress made, lessons learned, and outstanding needs by October 1st, 2019, and that will conclude the work of this task force. So if anybody here has somebody that they would like to nominate, they themselves would like to stand up and volunteer, or you have a fellow commissioner that you would like to have out of your hair until October 1st, please feel free to nominate them and see Eric Johnson. Although I am not continuing in my role as a member of the task force in year 2, please, again, take this under consideration. It actually was an honor, and I might complain about some of the things that have happened, and it does. It was also one of the most rewarding times in my career. So ports have been proven partners and can step across boundaries. That's why cities usually tend to be very jealous of us. We are pragmatic local governments. We operate facilities to serve our communities and enhance the state's economy. We made sizable investments in high productivity habitat restoration. And these expenditures of public funds have all shown real results. Ports have a demonstrated commitment to clean up legacy pollution and reduce sources of bioaccumulative chemicals, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions at our facilities, and to improve water quality of stormwater runoff. Because ports are not going anywhere, we work hard to comply fully with state and federal environmental regulations and meet the environmental expectations of the communities in which we serve. these expectations often exceed the requirements of the law. The task force meetings created a community of diverse organizations, and they orientated us to one common goal. Long Live the Kings is also an example of a partnership that we have. Jock White, who is executive director there, wanted to reach out to ports and explain about his organization, and said that any port interested in reaching out, he'd be more than happy to talk to. They have quite a few outreach initiatives, and there is opportunity to partner with them. Long Live the Kings has their spring education and outreach campaign called Survive the Sound. It's an interactive online game. It's one example of many partnerships that we have to take a hold of. The Seattle Times describes this as fantasy football for fish. And the fish featured here are Rainbow, Sammy, Salmonella, sick one, right? And Lulu. So now for my soapbox. Ports are leaders in education and have incredible reach. Almost half the marina slips in Washington are at port marinas. We have a proven track record of partnering with our local communities, cities, counties, state, and federal agencies. Here is one small example of what we did this summer because of these partnerships. I'm proud that this was launched and distributed through the height of the boating season. Thank you to Amy Windrop of WDFW, who was instrumental in getting 2 recommendations turned into immediate action. In summary, the task force did operate in an emotionally charged context under extraordinary time pressure and headline news. I often lacked shared understanding of the best available science and had no framework by which to evaluate and prioritize action. Each member of the task force felt the strain of the conflict between our principles and the need to compromise, but much good work was done. And just like any commission deliberation, once that vote is taken, we roll up our I'm done. Well, we roll up our sleeves, right? We ensure that our vision and our mission is met, we work hard, and we continue forward. So that's our end with that. Let's stay at the table, let's work hard, and I can't wait to see who steps up forward next for year 2. Thank you. Oh, we'll hold all our questions after all the rest of the panelists have gone forward, because between Hydro and Amy, I'm sure a lot of the questions that you have will already be answered in their presentation.